Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, WikiLeaks. Where do you start with this story?
Interpol has just issued a red notice for the arrest of the WikiLeaks founder, Julian Assange.
It's about politics, diplomacy, the law, and freedom of information. More evidence emerges over Egypt's less than democratic parliamentary elections, and China's out to change the global media narrative,
CNC World.
And it's spending billions of dollars to do it.
Welcome to our 24-hour live broadcast.
We've been doing this program for more than 4 years now, but we've never seen a media story as multifaceted and as fast-moving as the WikiLeaks Cablegate Julian Assange saga. Initially, the release of the confidential cables sent tremors through the diplomatic world, especially in Washington within the State Department. Now there are myriad legal issues at play involving freedom of information, extradition, and allegations of sexual misconduct against Assange. Governments, banks, and credit card companies are closing in on WikiLeaks. Hackers on Assange's side are fighting back through cyber warfare. And some of the mainstream media outlets working with WikiLeaks are having to defend themselves and what they published. Our starting point this week is cyberspace, where the power of information technology confronted government secrecy in a high-stakes story that's unfolding in newspapers, on TV screens, and on the World Wide Web. This is a mega story about an organization that 4 years ago did not even exist.
The whistleblowing website WikiLeaks.
And you can forgive the media just this once for the breathless tone of the coverage, because the revolution they're covering is their own.
Outside the courthouse, the media swarmed to get a glimpse of the elusive Julian Assange.
This is a preview of a lot of debates that we're going to be having in the future. How much power are we resting in the hands of these private gatekeepers? And is the internet going to continue to be that really unprecedented check on those in power?
This prosecution is politically motivated.
Words of Julian Assange's lawyer to a media circus outside a London magistrate's court this afternoon.
I think this is an extraordinary story. What we are now witnessing is a kind of explosion around data that is transforming the very idea of news.
And it's not just U.S. diplomacy that's affected. Osama bin Laden said media is a tool of war.
And new media is a potential weapon in the hands of millions. Corporations like Visa, MasterCard, and Amazon all know that now. After the U.S. Senator Joe Lieberman called on them to stop working with WikiLeaks, they either dropped the site or choked off its fundraising capabilities. Hackers then swarmed their sites, crashing all of them for a time, costing the corporations money. As the American writer and cyber activist John Perry Barlow put it via Twitter, the first serious info war is now engaged. The field of battle is WikiLeaks. You are the troops.
We did not initiate this, have nothing to do with it. We are not condemning it either. This is part of the outrage that we are seeing amongst the general public with regard to these attempts to silence us.
It's very disturbing that a company like Amazon.com that built its business on free speech and the exchange of ideas would wilt so quickly when asked by one individual senator to take down WikiLeaks. All it takes is one call from a senator expressing concern, no court proceedings, no court orders, and they'll just remove that completely.
What's really interesting is the way that people like Visa, like Amazon, have in effect launched an attack on WikiLeaks. But on the other hand, it also puts an onus on WikiLeaks. If they want to be sustainable, if they want to have a sense of responsibility, and they have also got to find a business model and a structure so that they can operate without being vulnerable to that kind of attack and that kind of pressure.
The media have feasted on the WikiLeaks story. The legal case against Julian Assange is one sensational aspect of that.
He's suspected of rape, sexual molestation, and illegal use of force.
And the media have become the story.
To me, New York Times has committed at least an act of bad citizenship.
Not just when American politicians criticize the New York Times for working with WikiLeaks, when U.S. diplomats have written about the media, Al Jazeera included. One diplomatic cable sent in 2009 said that when Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak complained about critical coverage on Al Jazeera, Qatar's prime minister offered to reel that coverage in for a year if Mubarak agreed to deliver a lasting settlement to the Palestinians. Al Jazeera described that story as very far from the truth and said its editorial policies were not guided by Qatar's foreign policy objectives.
Al Jazeera is probably the freest news organization in the Arab world. That doesn't mean it's completely free. But the bottom line is that it is relatively free. It is relatively fair. A couple of years ago, during the lead up to the Iraq invasion, one could argue Jazeera's coverage was very sensational, if not biased. It's come a long way since then. It's really matured. But at the end of the day, it is an entity at arm's length, perhaps, but an entity of the Qatari government.
And there was a major media story in Turkey, where the Erdogan government has been fighting with the huge Doğan Yayın media conglomerate. A U.S. diplomat based in Ankara cabled in 2008 that a government minister, Mehmet Şimşek, was advising people to sell their stock in Doğan, since the media group, quote, won't be around much longer, unquote. The minister has denied that, but the disclosure was news in Turkey.
The coverage has been very, very fragmented and polarized. The pro-government media has downplayed some of the embarrassing allegations made in the US diplomatic cables against the government, and those newspapers that take a more skeptical line towards the government have really reported more vigorously the allegations against the government.
All kinds of governments, not just America's, have problems with what WikiLeaks is doing. But Washington is leading the way when it comes to threatening talk.
We are taking aggressive steps.
The U.S. Attorney General says he's examining what laws could be used to shut down the site.
To the extent that we can find anybody who was involved in the breaking of American law, they will be held responsible.
While generally avoiding such language against the organization's partners in the mainstream media.
It's much easier to go after an unusual character, a guy like Julian Assange, who works for a website that most people hadn't heard of until maybe a few months ago, than to challenge an institution like the New York Times or the Guardian or any of these other quote-unquote legitimate and long-standing news outlets.
Amidst the blizzard of messages to appear online on the day Julian Assange was arrested was this one, regarding the upcoming World Press Freedom Day 2011. It expressed concern about the determination of some governments to censor and silence individuals and our commitment to support the free flow of information in this digital age. You can find it on the official website of the U.S. State Department, unless, that is, some enterprising, energized hackers get there first. And here's how our Global Village voices see the coverage of the WikiLeaks Cablegate story.
Governments haven't attacked the mainstream media the way they've attacked WikiLeaks because the mainstream media is more controllable and more likely to cooperate with these governments than WikiLeaks has been. It's also that the mainstream media are a harder target than WikiLeaks because of their established brand.
WikiLeaks is definitely on the run, but it's determined not to hide. Last Friday, wikileaks.org was forced offline. But by Tuesday, it had already gained the support of over 500 new mirror sites to host its web pages. It seems that knocking websites offline one by one simply won't work.
This does seem to be the first case where the internet has truly hit a wall and run into the carefully controlled metastructure. And whether WikiLeaks survives that in its current form is probably still quite debatable. But whether the information survives isn't. It will, and it already is.
Time now for Listening Post News Bites. The second round of voting in Egypt's parliamentary elections is now over, mired in controversy, and once again the mainstream news media struggled to report the story. That's because many journalists were kept out of polling stations, they say, harassed, detained, even beaten by police or supporters of the ruling NDP, the National Democratic Party. But that reporting void is being filled at least partially by citizen journalists. Sites like Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube have all been showing videos of alleged electoral fraud and intimidation. This video of a polling station in Bilbais is said to show government officials forging ballots in favor of the NDP. Then there's this one of an NDP candidate apparently threatening Egyptians with a sword, telling them to get to the polling station and vote. President Hosni Mubarak's government claims to have won 419 out of a possible 508 seats after its main opposition party, the Muslim Brotherhood, boycotted the second round of the election. Britain's media are being blamed for England's unsuccessful bid to host the 2018 Football World Cup. The BBC current affairs program Panorama aired a critical report on FIFA, the international football governing body, just 3 days before FIFA announced which countries would host the next two tournaments. That report alleged that 3 members of FIFA's executive committee accepted bribes in the 1990s from a sports marketing firm. The Sunday Times, a UK weekly paper, was also on this story and reported widespread corruption in FIFA's voting process. Even though a number of FIFA officials were then suspended, FIFA accused the newspaper of sensationalism and twisting the facts. Many people questioned the timing of the news outlet's exposés, including Andy Anson. He spearheaded England's bid and said,
"My only issue, as you know, with the Sunday Times and the BBC, more the BBC, was the timing of it. For us, it was almost impossible to bounce back."
The BBC's Director General, Mark Thompson, defended the timing of the Panorama report.
If you believe that you have a matter of real public concern to broadcast, there have got to be overwhelmingly powerful reasons for not broadcasting. And I have to say,
no regrets on this one, really.
I believe we were right to broadcast, and I have to say, I believe that we have very strong support from the British public in broadcasting.
Results for the presidential election in the West African country of Ivory Coast are in dispute, and French media outlets stand accused of trying to destabilize the country through their reporting. The incumbent president, Laurent Gbagbo, refused to accept the official election results that gave opposition candidate Alassane Ouattara 54% of the vote. Then, when media outlets from France began reporting the results in the former French colony, the Ivory Coast's state-run media started openly encouraging hostility towards French journalists. Reports on the country's public broadcaster accused the French of meddling.
La majorité des médias français
And they showed pictures of France 24 journalists, a move that some media watchdog groups said could put those journalists in harm's way. The anti-French rhetoric was also carried in some of the country's privately owned newspapers such as Le Temps and Notre Voix, which support the current government. We're back after the break with a look at China, going global with a soft power media push. Welcome back. China's got an image problem, and it's trying to fix it. When the country flexes its new economic muscle, people and markets sit up and listen. But on the political side, it's not nearly as influential. One of the ways China wants to change that is through the media. Earlier this year, the Chinese government launched an international TV network designed and engineered to rival big global news outlets like this one. It's all part of a carefully constructed media campaign, TV integrated with print and both fed by wire services that China hopes will rework its image around the world. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on China's soft power plans for the media and whether international news consumers will be won over.
This is China's latest foray into the media world. Foreign journalists reporting global events and a growing network of international news bureaus.
It's a whole idea of how can we sort of commercialize propaganda? How can we get our message out?
This is CNC World, a new perspective.
CNC World started broadcasting in July this year. The launch of the station is part of a much wider campaign by the Chinese government, a program of what's known as cultural sector reform. The message is clear. China wants to improve its image worldwide and will use the power of the media to do it.
Welcome to our 24-hour live broadcast.
Make no mistake, this is a priority for the Chinese. They really want to make sure that their voice is heard and that people in other parts of the world understand China's point of view, especially on the hot topics of the day.
Chinese journalists have come up with this term, grabbing the megaphone, to refer to this policy of kind of pushing the agenda more aggressively. Grabbing the megaphone is about getting the party's mainstream voice and version of events out quickly.
And grabbing the megaphone is costing China. The budget for this media campaign is nearly $7 billion, and that includes CNC, its 120 foreign bureaus, and new American and European editions of the China Daily newspaper. All this is in addition to what China already has out there. CCTV, China Central Television, already broadcasts in 4 foreign languages. But CNC is different. Unlike CCTV, it's not even aired in mainland China. Its primary target is a global audience. Its goal is influence overseas.
CNC World doesn't really look that much different from the old CCTV news. One has to wonder if the Chinese are trying to use this channel to make inroads in the more established media markets in Europe or in the United States, or if they're really trying to use this as an opportunity to build an audience and build persuasion tools in the South, in Africa, South Asia, and South America.
Well, of all the initiatives that China's taking to get its message out, I would say CNC World's probably the largest. This is an international news channel. China sees this competing with the BBC, with CNN, with Al Jazeera, with a number of the major heavyweight channels worldwide.
This media push comes on the back of China's growing importance on the global political stage. The country and its leaders are very aware that they are under the global media microscope.
The issue of how the Chinese are portrayed in the international media is an extremely sensitive topic for Chinese policymakers. They've long complained over how foreign correspondents have covered the country from the inside and how international media outlets have reported on the country from the outside.
The Chinese authorities never honor the autonomy.
It's this idea, again, that if China doesn't enhance its own soft power, if it doesn't have cultural soft power and influence like the US has with Hollywood, etc., then China is not going to be able to become a superpower.
Much of the negative press China gets from international news outlets is coverage on Tibet.
China is refusing to relent in its crackdown against the Tibetan uprising.
Internet censorship.
But today, the Chinese matched Google's breach in their wall with another wall.
And the Tiananmen Square massacre.
Police stood ready to prevent any gatherings.
You may remember March 2008, there was unrest in Tibet, Lhasa. There were riots. And after the riots in Lhasa, there was an international outcry. We had 2008, the Beijing Olympics coming up. And as we had the international leg of the torch relay, there were a lot of protests around the world.
I want Tibet back!
They tried to put a lid on the story, and that's how they wanted to control it. What happened instead is they completely lost the agenda to international media because it was still reported.
It is the latest day of protests led by Buddhist monks.
So this became a kind of a watershed moment, a case study in how to not do propaganda internationally.
China's media has credibility issues. Most news outlets are beholden to the state. The Great Firewall limits internet access, and every great leap forward, like the loosening of reporting in the run-up to the Beijing Olympics, seems to be followed by 2 leaps back.
Very, very few governments in the world understand media better than the Chinese authorities. It's by effectively mobilizing and meticulously controlling the media that enable them to run a country with a population of 1.3 billion. They understand very well what media freedom and independence mean to the stability of the society and the consequences to its political mandate.
China's understanding of journalism is much different than you and my understanding of journalism, to be frank. There's actually a journalism guidebook in China, and it does say that journalism must adhere to the party. China's trying to influence a group of people or countries, an audience that doesn't see journalism the same way that China does.
All of which begs the question, why would audiences accustomed to more open journalism want to watch the Chinese version?
As an Indian young student, I would be interested in the vocabulary that China has used and is trying to use to present itself to the world.
China seems to be the emerging market right now, and I'd want to watch a station like that to see what types of plans they have for their world markets and possibly for our future.
I would probably not watch it. I would assume it'd be government or state controlled and inherently unreliable.
I'm very interested because China has just become South Africa's main trading partner. They're going to completely change the way that South Africa operates internationally, at least, and I'd very much like to know what they're up to.
So at the very least, what China can provide audiences, despite its flawed journalistic model, is a different perspective in a media landscape dominated by voices and transmissions from the West.
More Global Village Voices now on China trying to become a global media player.
After the propaganda war in early 2008, Beijing realized that she must have a say, especially regarding issues that may potentially harm her international reputation. China certainly has the right to make herself heard, just like the US and other countries.
A censored media organization that is controlled and funded by the state is unlikely to be seen as credible, even if, as is the case with Xinhua, they do have some fine journalists. Unless they are able to report freely, the organization as a whole is likely to be viewed with skepticism.
This is the Communist Party putting the party line out. If they wanted the Chinese voice to be heard, they wouldn't make it so difficult for foreign journalists to speak to Chinese. They wouldn't harass Chinese who speak to us. It would be a much more open system. This is purely a propaganda effort, and propaganda never sells.
Finally, those WikiLeaks diplomatic cables turn the news into a sort of choose-your-own adventure of international embarrassment and intrigue. Pick a country, a head of state, and let the scandal begin. The people at Taiwan's Next Media animation studios certainly took advantage of the international cast of characters for their latest video. It features the cure for what ails Gaddafi, the French president's new clothes, and Julian Assange doing battle with Uncle Sam, literally. It's our web video of the week. We'll see you next time at the Listening Post.
维基解密网站爆料美国外交的不当。美国政府这回又有新的头痛问题了，大量的机密外交文件被爆料网站维基解密公布。华府尝试说服维基解密不要爆料，但是失败。最惊人的内容包括美国下令官员去监视联合国的高官，并采集他们的 DNA。伊朗总统艾麦迪内贾被形容为希特勒。阿拉伯国家的领袖曾要求美国炸毁伊朗的核弹工厂。外交文件又揭露，各国领袖都被诽谤，包括法国总统沙科吉及利比亚领袖格达费。又嘲讽俄罗斯总理普丁，说他是扛把子又像蝙蝠侠，也提到他跟黑道的关系。有些政府已表明会继续支持美国政府，但不是所有被得罪的国家都那么大方。